This video is sponsored by 2K.
Well, we're here. Don't worry about saying goodbye. I'm sure we'll be doing this all again soon enough. Ah, get off my bus.
And this was my first step into adulthood. Well, kind of. I was 17 at the time that the first Borderlands game came out. I remember keeping up with it from various gaming magazines, console magazines about what this game was. It looked exciting, but I hadn't quite pulled the trigger on actually buying the game. One of the reasons what pushed me into actually playing it was me going on a first date with a girl who said, "Hey, I play this game, it's really fun." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, I'm going to get my mum to get it because I'm 17 and the game was 18 plus." So that was a little bit uncomfortable, but it did end up with me being with that girl for a couple of years before I went to university. 15 years later, Borderlands 4 is about to come out, and 2K asked me to make a video on what I'm excited about. And naturally, this has been a game that I've loved over the past 15 years, playing all four of the main brunts of the game, Borderlands 1, 2, 3, and hopefully 4 very, very soon, but also some of the spin offs, pre sequel, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands that came out a couple of years ago, and even the Tales from the Borderlands series, really cementing this universe as one of the most exciting and interesting areas of gaming that still holds dear to me after all this time. But that specific question of why I'm excited for Borderlands 4 is kind of hard. There's a lot of stuff I'm excited about, but what are the main things that are pulling me towards it? It was hard for me to put it into words in a video up until I met and hung out with two of the developers from Gearbox that make Borderlands when I met them at Gamescom. Because after speaking to them, I realized that they've done some really clever stuff that's keeping Borderlands 4 grounded to its roots, but also pushing new territory that other looter shooter PvE games aren't even really considering, it feels like. But for this video, I want to break it down into three main areas. And the first one is a simple question, but a really hard one to answer. What is Borderlands? Now, if you're playing like Family Feud or Family Fortunes in the UK and you're trying to think of what are the common answers that people would have to that question, a couple of those would crop up and still would be present in Borderlands 4. For example, Claptrap, a character that has basically been your guide, your Sherpa through the games. For better or for worse, he's a little bit annoying. You can also mute him in Borderlands 4 if you really, really don't like him. But he's essentially a character that takes you through the game. He's endearing, but he's also just an iconic face to really show what this universe has to offer, both for the characters but also its kind of humor. You might also answer Vault Hunters. There's always been 4 characters to play in these main Borderlands games, and they're basically set actual characters that sort of fit archetypes of other roles in other RPGs, right? Big, tanky, burly characters like Brick in the first game, sniper hunters like Mordecai or Flak in Borderlands 3. Not only characters that you can play and fall in love with because they all have unique bits of kit, but characters that you also see in future versions of the game, participating in the story that you're cementing yourself into. There's also the technical side of it as well. Back when Borderlands 1 came out, we only had one Xbox 360 to play off of, so me and my then girlfriend played a lot of split screen on one small television trying to play through the game and do what we could. 15 years later, local split screen is still an option in Borderlands 4. But they're just an example of things that have stayed the same for Borderlands, that Gearbox have tried to cement as their main identity. But what I find really interesting about Borderlands 4 is the stuff that used to be Borderlands' identity that they're starting to change. So the second point I wanted to go over is what Borderlands isn't. Because up until now, I would have said that Borderlands was about Pandora, the world that you play on, this barren, derelict wasteland that you have to roam around to go and search for a vault, to find big treasures, big monsters to fight. It was a pretty simple, straightforward premise, but a massive world, even back in 2009, that you could move around and honestly struggle with if you end up in the wrong places at the wrong time. But for Borderlands 4, for the first time ever, the game will not be starting out at least on Pandora. Maybe we head back there in the future in Borderlands 4, maybe in a DLC. But instead, we play the majority of the storyline on a new planet called Kairos. And this is where me talking to two of the developers comes in, because I remember talking to them after I did an interview with them, saying how scary was it to have a Borderlands game not set on Pandora. And they said initially it was terrifying, but once we started putting the pieces in place, it became very easy and very liberating, honestly. And that was like an interesting point, and it made me sort of realize something about Borderlands 4. They've really done a good job of cementing what this game actually is. That, you know, there's Claptrap, there's Vault Hunters that you play, they're not customizable characters that you would create yourself. But Gearbox have also done a good job to say this is stuff that Borderlands isn't. Borderlands isn't always going to be set on Pandora exclusively. We want to take a trip around this universe to show off different planets and different societies and stuff. Even simple things like the Siren class, which has been consistent in all of the Borderlands games so far. They're very supernatural, elemental focused with certain abilities. But for this time, the devs have even said themselves that the Siren of Vex is a cool character that you can customize and build in elemental ways, whether you want to do cryo, freezing damage, or shock damage. There's other characters that provide more bits of kit that you would typically expect from a Siren. Even looking at previous games with Sirens like Maya and Amara, you would have this phase grasp ability, but in Borderlands 4, the ability is still present, but it's on Harlow, a completely different character that isn't a Siren, that just has similar bits of tech that she liked to copy. Borderlands' worlds have also been sectioned off. There were little parts of the map that you would play through, and these maps could be pretty big in scale, but they would always connect to each other. Borderlands 4 is a big map over on Kairos where you can pretty much travel wherever you need to go, and it's completely new waters for Gearbox to be playing with. But the other thing that the developers from Gearbox said to me after we spoke about some of the things that are just changing in Borderlands, just identity-wise, they also said that because they did things this way, it means that Borderlands 4 is a great opportunity for new players to get involved. I used to try to play Borderlands 1 with my brother. He was a lot younger than me, so it used to be me essentially Gordon Ramsay shouting at him and telling him what to do when I needed his help. But I spoke to him recently about Borderlands 4, and he said, do I need to play Borderlands 2, 3, or any of the other games to jump in with 4? And the answer is pretty easy, no. Yeah, you can play those games to get a little bit more context on some of the characters that you'll see. For example, Zane that's in Borderlands 4 was my main in Borderlands 3. You could play him back then, but you don't need to play the game in order to understand the story that's happening, especially because it is on a whole different world and just feels like a very different game. Not to mention, if you did want to play some of the older games, they're almost always on sale for a couple of quid. So if you did want to try out playing Wonderlands, that came out a couple of years ago, I picked that up on a recent sale because I actually didn't have the chance to play it. But I think that's kind of what has gravitated me more towards Borderlands 4 than maybe even previous versions of the game, honestly. It's the idea that it's familiar in a sense, that, you know, Claptrap's there, you've got the 4 Vault Hunters, you've got tons of loot, tons of guns to play with, and legendaries to hunt. So it's familiar in a sense, but the world is so different 15 years after Borderlands 1 came out. Even in the 6 years since Borderlands 3 came out, looter shooters have changed a lot. And people's habits and tendencies whilst gaming have changed a lot in that time too. To take a little bit of the interview I had with Anthony Nicholas, who's one of the main producers behind Borderlands 4, they at Gearbox were aware of this, and it was one of the main things that pushed them to make some of these changes. So have a listen.
So you're right, the landscape changes, expectations for consumers changes a lot too, but it's more about like what are some of those things. And I think, you know, to point out, you know, there's a couple of things that we've done when we talk about seamless that has made it to where it's maybe 10 years ago we weren't thinking about it like that, but like now in this game, if Jason is playing on this side of Carcadia Burn and I'm on this other side, you know, maybe back in the day it would have been fine for you to just walk over there or expect that, but now we know that consumers' expectations change, and time is money. People they don't want to spend time doing tedious things. So now what we did was made it to where you can just open up the map and teleport straight to your co-op buddy.
For me, there genuinely is something exciting at a game that goes, we want to be familiar. If you've enjoyed and loved the Borderlands series since its inception, We want to have those elements there for you, but some of those elements that maybe kept Borderlands stuck in the past, Gearbox have clearly wanted to try and change. They don't want to be tethered to the idea of being on Pandora. They want to explore the universe a little bit more. Something that they dipped their toe in for Borderlands 3, but the fact that there's no Pandora at all in Borderlands 4 is a pretty big step for Gearbox to make, making it more as this seamless world on one big map, as opposed to separate levels that are sectioned off from each other, is another big step for this company to take when they've never made a step like this before. But they've done it basically with their chests out, and they've been bullish, I suppose, on some of these elements that make the game fresh and exciting. So if, like me, you've been playing Borderlands since the beginning, it is going to feel familiar. But if you want something that feels up to date in 2025 with good gunplay, good movement, really good, fundamentally strong systems for playing the game, for loot, for creating builds and just unleashing chaos, you are going to find that in spades with Borderlands 4. Now, with stuff like Endgame, which is a big thing now that wasn't necessarily back when Borderlands 1 came out, we still don't have all of the details yet. But considering the themes of what Gearbox have been doing, I'd have to imagine that they've taken a lot of what makes Endgame good and trying to evolve it for an up-to-date audience in 2025. So 2K, that's my answer. That's what makes me excited for Borderlands, that there is that sense of familiarity and a bit of nostalgia since my late teens, but also that feeling that we're up to date. What does Borderlands look like in current times with current gaming habits? And how do they keep pushing the needle to evolve what this game is and how much it means to people? Because yeah, this game means a lot to me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on Kairos.